So I'll kick us off. Welcome to everyone joining us today. Thank you for taking the time out. I know it's a busy day at a busy time of the year for many firms. I imagine most of you are quite familiar with Pirical, the company. Just for completeness, I'll say that we're the business intelligence platform behind data-driven law firms. So more so about the business of law than the practice of law. And we've just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. Scores on the doors is we're proud to service 50% of the US top 50 firms, the AmLaw 50, 80% of the UK top 50. That's our home. We're based in London here. We're probably best known for our global database of 700,000 lawyers and their key clients, which is all tracked using public data. That's a go-to tool for recruiters, strategy, competitive intelligence teams, and BD marketing folk. And they use it to answer questions like who should we hire, where should we grow, which firms are working with client X, that sort of thing. And on top of that, we also offer private data benchmarking, which is particularly relevant today, across key organizational health metrics for law firms. So that's how finance, HR, and leadership teams at our customers answer where are we strong versus peer firms and where should we invest. And the big common topics of du jour are size and shape of business services, partner leverage ratios, new client revenue growth rates, and associate productivity. We'll demonstrate today some of the ways that we differentiate from potentially other providers in this space in terms of level of depth and actionability of insights. So today we'll talk about secrets of associate productivity. This is work that we kicked off really very late 2024. So this is coming up to about nearly 18 months of working on and off with clients on this topic. This webinar that Sarah has helped put together and will present today is a highlights package of kind of big picture lessons learned. And a few kind of hygiene factors just before I hand over to Sarah. We are recording today in Pirical Studios. We'll circulate the recording afterwards to attendees, so I guess it frees you up from taking copious notes. And we will be taking questions probably towards the end, but if you want to put them in the chat as we go along, it's possible that we could we might address them midway. I think we'll probably take them at the end, as agreed. So before we get going, let me introduce you to Sarah. Sarah will take us on our journey through associate productivity. Sarah joined Pirical last year in our analytics consulting team. So with me, we're exploring questions often in the format of what are the best performing firms doing differently, typically using a blend of public and private data. So if you're a student of the business of law, which I know many of you are, Sarah is a fantastic person to have on your speed dial. She recently moved to London from Wisconsin via California. In her spare time, she loves running, cats, and presumably running from cats.
Running towards cats.
Towards cats, yes. Run towards. That's it from me right now. Sarah, would you like to show us what we have learned?
Yes. Thanks, Rob, for that introduction. Great to meet most of you. I've probably met some of you in person, but thank you for taking the time to join in with us today. Let's get started. So, as what's very common with Pirical, we love to start with a case study to just ground the analysis in something real and something that really brings it to life. So let's start by talking about Firm X. Firm X is a mid-size international full-service firm. They're headquartered in the UK. The managing director at Firm X is under pressure. Revenue growth is on the agenda, and this is to contrast with profitability growth. Revenue growth is one of the key metrics that she's looking towards. So let's look at the productivity of Firm X. As you can see here, Firm X has lower associate productivity than its peer firms across every practice area. So these are just Firm X's 4 largest, and for all of them, they lag behind peer firms. What's also interesting here is we can see that over time, associate productivity has been declining, and so the gap between Firm X and peer firms has been increasing. To address this, we estimated that Firm X could right-size its associate population to match available work. This could save up to £8 million. Or Firm X could increase the productivity of its existing associate population. And we think this could generate up to $31 million in additional revenue. So some really big numbers here. The size of the prize is really significant. But which approach should Firm X take? We have a little quiz here to help figure it out. So to increase associate productivity, Firm X should ask, is the team growing total billable hours, so total work, faster than peers? If the answer is no, Firm X should focus on BD and focus on winning more work. If the answer is yes, Firm X should ask, is the team growing headcount faster than total billable hours? If the answer is yes, then Firm X should reduce or slow their headcount growth. But if the answer is no, Firm X should focus on productivity. And it turns out the answer is no. So if Firm X should focus on productivity, we need to identify what they can learn from the leading firms in order to do so. And let's look at the market data that Pirical has to help answer this question. We're going to look at leaders versus laggards. And for those of you familiar with analytics consulting at Pirical, you know we love this concept of leaders being the top firms in the market versus laggards, the worst performing firms in the market. And we're looking at median chargeable hours or productivity in these firms. Let's start with targets, big topic. We see that market-wide, targets have stayed relatively constant. So they're hovering around 1580 over the last 5 years. It would be normal to assume that the majority of associates hit target, but actually, quite surprising, I think, is about only 25% of associates reach target. And this has been the case consistently over the past 5 years. Looking at the aggregate figure hides part of the story, though, so we want to split it up and look at the market leaders first. And you can see here that they've actually been increasing their targets year over year. Market laggards, on the other hand, have been decreasing them. And even with those higher targets, leaders are realizing more hours than laggards. So leaders are realizing about 90% of hours based on their target, whereas laggards are closer to 80%. Even this 10% difference can equate to £15.5 million in added revenue per year for each firm. So it's a big difference. Of course, there is a cost to these high targets. We've seen in our market data that big targets command big salaries. So if you ask for more, you have to pay more. And we've actually mapped out median base salaries for the lawyers in our data set according to their target chargeable hours. And the curve that we see here is nonlinear, which is a really important point. And to kind of bring this to life, let's imagine you're working 1,800 hours. You're kind of working flat out. At 1,850 hours, you need to pay for a gym closer to your house because you're just at the office all the time. At 1,900 hours, you need meal delivery because you don't have time to cook for yourself anymore. And at 1,950 hours, you need to hire a nanny because you don't have the time to take care of your kids. So the cost of working 50 additional hours gets increasingly significant, hence the nonlinear nature of the curve that you see here. What else is interesting is the reverse isn't actually true. So if you just pay more, you don't necessarily get more. In other words, if you give your associates high salaries, you won't necessarily get an increase in productivity. And we actually see this across all PQE levels. So I'll just flip through them here so you can see there's clearly no correlation between salary and productivity. So NQ, PQE 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 11, and 12 plus. So salary is only one part of the story. We should test the other parts of performance management to see what else we can uncover. Let's start with carrots. So market-wide, we see that bonus increases as utilization increases. However, market laggards cap off bonuses. So the higher utilization doesn't necessarily get you more in a bonus if you work at a market laggard. Leaders, however, don't cap off their bonuses. So you get more and more the more you work above your target. And the gap between leaders and laggards in bonus paid out just increases. Leaders pay out bonuses to 17% of their associates who are under target. So if you don't hit your target, 17% of you will still get a bonus. Laggards, however, pay out bonuses to 41% of them, so a much larger chunk. So there's some difference in bonus structure between the leaders and laggards. The less fun part of performance management are the sticks. So we are able to look at involuntary attrition rates across the market. And we saw that leading firms have higher involuntary attrition for the least productive associates. So what's shown on the chart here is your bottom quartile associates in terms of productivity. And you can see that the involuntary attrition rate for leaders is almost 3 times higher than that for laggards. So they're doing something about their least productive associates. On the flip side of that, they also help the lowest productivity associates get better. So these are charts of what happened to the associates that were in the lowest quartile of productivity. You can see that for leaders, 40% of them actually became more productive the next year, and 16% of them actually were in the top half of productivity the next year. So they're doing more to actually help address the low productivity. So we've talked through a lot. We love hypothesis testing at Pirical. But let's kind of bring it all together and talk about what it all means. So if I was the managing director at Firm X, maybe one day.
You're on the wrong
not.
career path.
Probably not. I would increase targets We've talked about how higher targets correlates to higher productivity. But I would also need to increase salaries. I would not, however, just increase salaries on their own. I would also offer larger and larger bonuses for those above target. Probably pay out less bonuses for those under target. And then I would also look at my performance management to make sure something was being done about the lowest productive associates. Just to recap, for firm X with 250 associates, mid-size, these changes could equate to over 24 million. So the size of the prize is really big. All right. I have no idea how long that was. But we have time for questions. So feel free to ask in the Zoom chat.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for taking us through that. I think some of these things feel like obvious in retrospect. Like, well, of course that would have happened. But I think within there are some surprising things, like the fact that most firms in the market cruise along with about 25% of associates hitting target. I think if you're up in the leadership of the firm, that's quite obvious because you see it on your spreadsheet every year. Mm. But to most other people, I think that feels unusual. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put up your targets all the time. Just putting up your targets is a knee-jerk reaction that people often talk about. But I think it's more important that what's the framework around your targets? Like what's the it may be in many firms' instances that they would be better off lowering their targets and actually increasing performance management and incentivization towards the ones that they do have. So I am going to have a look for any questions that come in. But in the meantime, I thought maybe I could ask you one of my own, which is, what other topics did we look at that were left on the cutting room floor today around productivity that you think might be worth a mention?
It's such a good question. One that I spend a decent amount of time thinking about is the size and shape of law firms. So where is their leverage coming from? Is it coming from more junior employees, more senior employees? And where is that kind of center of productivity? As a secret, it's PQE 3 to 5 is what we see in the market as being the most productive associates. So I always think that's interesting in terms of how law firms are structuring their associate pool and how that's changing over time. Mm-hmm. We also looked at legal tech, really hot topic, especially with all the AI buzz that's going on. And we saw that firms that invest more in legal tech are more productive. So we actually have some data that supports that. Again, not really surprising, but it's always nice to have that validated by the real data that Pirical gets on a monthly basis from our customers. So those are two.
Yeah, those are two pretty strong ones. I think we tested a number of different characteristics about associates over that same project period, and one of the ones that caught a lot of attention, particularly in the UK and the US, because the culture is so different, is around people that take 2 weeks, at least a 2-week block of vacation leave every year. So if you, in a 12-month period, if you take at least a 2-week block of holiday, you will likely be more productive than peers who didn't. And it's funny talking to our US customers, they sort of say, well, that's almost unheard of over here anyway, just the whole concept of it. So
can confirm. Yeah.
Which I think it's an argument in favor of sort of rest and rejuvenation. Heather on the chat has asked the question, You ready for this? Are you monitoring office attendance and how this impacts figures?
Yeah, so I'll start to answer that question, and then I might pass it back to you as our data whiz. But so it's a great question, Heather. And what we've done is we've actually normalized all of the data that we're using into a full year of gross working days. So we get absences in addition to productivity data, and we combined all of that to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples, and we account for those cases.
Yes. So obviously, I guess days out of the office and for absences, yes, and all that kind of stuff is taken into account. But the other side of that question is, are people who regularly attend the office rather than working from home more productive? We don't have that data, is the truth. It requires swipe card data. And the interesting thing about it is almost no firm has the right consent policies around it for it to be used for data analytics. So I'm sure that we will get around to looking at that at some point. But at the moment, it's not being done.
What is interesting and tangentially related is we also looked at whether investment in office space was correlated to productivity.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
And we found that better offices was not correlated to higher productivity. So it didn't really matter if you offered all of the perks in your office and you had the snazziest space in terms of productivity figures.
Yes. So the inspiration and point of reference for that is in the UK, they do a survey of all associates for a publication called Roll on Friday. And it basically gives you a subjective rating of how much associates think their office is whizzy. And yes, there's no correlation between real world productivity and the associates who think their offices are great. Likewise, there are no correlations between all of the other questions on that survey, including best management, best culture, yada, yada. But the one that there is a correlation for is best work-life balance, which is unsurprisingly a negative correlation, which is if you feel like you have a very good work-life balance, then you're likely to not be working very many chargeable hours a year. So more than anything, that one's a sanity check, just to make sure that everything's kind of calibrated properly. Okay. Let's go for one more of mine. What can we say about the peer set here? What kind of firms are these in aggregate? You mentioned it was about 13 firms. And then how do our customers select peer firms to benchmark against?
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. We have 13 market firms in the leaders and laggards category. They're UK-based. We have a decent chunk of top law firms in that sample. And we have a couple of firms that are based in the US and have a presence in the UK as well. So it's a representative pool of what's out there. In terms of how customers can select their peer firms, so they give us a list of firms that they would like in their peer set. And Pirical goes back and based on the firms that we have onboarded to our platform, we will put together a group of some firms within the full list. We can't tell you exactly who is in your peer set for privacy concerns and just to protect the anonymity of the data. But then we agree on that subset of the list for you. And on Pod, our data platform, you are then able to look at all of your data, including productivity figures, against that peer set.
Excellent, thank you. There is a question here. I'll pose it to you. Have you seen any impact on well-being for associates as they are more productive? I.e., is there a correlation between well-being and productivity? Is there kind of a sweet spot to aim for? I have a couple of thoughts about that. Is there anything pops to your mind in the first instance?
Curious to hear your thoughts. Appreciate the question.
Yeah.
For sure.
One of the things that I was looking at a little while ago was This was actually from the point of view of voluntary attrition, so not the same as totally as well-being. I guess there's a sort of happiness angle to this, but we're not talking about people sort of going on sick leave here. But if you look at people working hours much higher than the targets of their firm, so they're sort of working more than they were promised, give or take, there's high attrition there. But there's also high attrition the other way around, which is people working much fewer hours than the targets of their firm, which kind of indicates that this is voluntary attrition, by the way, so people who are choosing to leave, which kind of indicates that people join busy firms because they want to be busy and they want to kind of build a career there. And likewise, there's the flip side of this is there's lower attrition at firms where there's a good match between what happens in reality and what the employer value proposition is in terms of the targets. We're an 1,800 hours firm. People are generally working 1,800 hours. That's seen as largely a good thing. And so getting that alignment right between, across your employer value proposition of what the targets are and what the reality is, I think is probably a good thing. Setting good expectations and boundaries. And I guess, therefore, in answer to your question, there probably isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. You can probably find willing candidates or willing employees for any employer value proposition you put forward, as long as you're candid about it and everyone knows what page you're on. Hopefully that helps. That was a question from Catherine. Any further questions from the audience? If not, I propose we move to wrap up at the half hour. Just checking my windows, making sure I'm not going. Okay. Any further business?
Next steps, call to action.
Next steps, we would love to help you assess your data, your productivity data. We require finance data on pod alongside your HR data, as is traditional, and please get in touch if that's not currently available for you. Obviously, most of you are obviously pod users at the moment, so we will. So you will have some of that functionality turned on. And then just a mention for our next live event, Pirical Pioneers, coming up. One in London in May. So look out for the save the date and event invitation for that one. And Sarah and I are now full steam ahead preparing the next set of Exec Insights installment ready for that event, really. That's the next project. Okay. Thank you all very much for your time today. And it was a pleasure to host you. We shall see you at the next edition of this.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.